Okay, hello everyone. This is Jana Stretton coming to you from the Blue Mountains again. This is the second part of Meet the Therapist that I've started, and yeah, just wanting to introduce some amazing people to you. So today I have with me Marcus Dabb. So I might actually get you to introduce yourself, Marcus.
Yeah, hi, I'm Marcus from the Blue Mountains, and I do a bit of numerology, astrology, a bit of career guidance. I like to sort of blend over different modalities and different ways of looking at things.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. And do you have like a website or a Facebook page or anything that people can look you up on?
I've got a Facebook page called Polaris, and also a website which is called A Different Drummer, which is all one word, .com.au, and that outlines some of the different things that I do, including using sort of numerology and astrology to give people some guidance.
Yeah, cool. Sounds good. All right. Well, I'll have the link on the bottom, and people can kind of connect with you.
Sure.
So, do you want to start with maybe either a backstory or what numerology is? What do you reckon you'd like to go with first?
Yeah. So I guess numerology is sort of just the science of numbers. And if we want to understand, the material world that we look at sort of physics, or we look at chemistry to sort of get two different pictures. So more ancient cultures looked at the idea of astrology and numerology. So astrology, looking at the stars and sort of finding some sort of meaning behind them, has been around for a long time. But as for numerology, that was sort of exposed to, I guess, what we see now when Pythagoras did a bit of research. So Pythagoras was a Greek philosopher, and he traveled around and he thought there's got to be other ways of looking at the world rather than just this intellectual, way that the Greeks, like to discuss ideas in philosophy. So he went away from Greece for, I think it might have been a dozen years or so. And he went to Egypt and all these other countries and said, how do you look at the world? How do you understand things? And he found of all the different ways that people looked at things, the thing that really struck a chord with him was numbers. And he came to the conclusion everything's numbers. So he came back to Greece and he created a mystery school, and he taught geometry and astronomy and all these sort of natural sciences and mathematics. But for certain people, he sort of inducted them in what he called the mystery school. So his idea was that having knowledge of things like numerology, that there's sort of a bigger picture to things behind the scenes, is something that people have to earn the right to know. If you know these things and use it to manipulate people, you understand their weaknesses and different things like that, then it's not something just for the general public. So that was where sort of numerology came into the picture a bit. And if you speak to the average person and you say, what's your astrology, what's your sun sign, the average person's going to know it. It's just something that's in the collective. But if you ask the average person what's your sort of number, most people wouldn't have a clue, because numerology and astrology sort of went through a little bit of a split, not so much in disagreeing with one another, but when popular culture, when newspapers were really starting to take hold, people trying to sell their newspapers worked out that if they had a celebrity and they did their astrology, and they said this is the person, this is why they do things this way, people sort of started to buy more papers. And so someone came up with the idea, what if we did personal astrology for everyone? That means everyone's going to start buying the paper. So then we got horoscopes, and from that point onwards, astrology became sort of more mainstream, and numerology was a bit on the fringes. But in sort of exploring both of these sort of realms, I find, just as like you wouldn't say chemistry is better than physics or the other way around, I'd say that they're sort of sister sciences that work together.
Yeah.
So,
wow, that's really fascinating. I didn't actually know that you do astrology as well, so that's really cool.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. So I heard you say manipulate in there. What's the go with that? So if you know stuff, can you actually influence people with numerology?
Yeah, so
oh, that's what you meant about the newspaper, is that right?
No, but just generally, like with any of these ideas that people, we think about people being conditioned by the culture they were raised in, the style of parenting they had, all these sort of factors. Where, another layer to that would be looking at someone's esoteric blueprint. So what their astrology chart, what their numerology says. We've come and we've chosen certain themes and certain lessons to learn. And so these sort of experiences will come to us. So someone who's, say, had many lifetimes of being very strict, being monastic, all that sort of stuff, to be more balanced and whole, they might need to have a life where they explore all sorts of new things. They go on adventures and travel, and they're not sort of just insular. They might be working with a lot of people. So if you understand that someone has, like, say, a predilection to overindulging, they're stimulated by change and new things, then you might be able to say, entice them. Just say you were in love with some person who's married or whatnot. You might know that, say, they're a life path 5 that loves change and stimulation. You might sort of play on that and say, have you thought about opening your relationship? Or, you could do all these various things if you're not doing them from pure motives, if you understand someone's sort of deeper wiring. So that's sort of what I'm sort of getting at, that this sort of knowledge wasn't given away freely. People had to sort of prove that they were going to use it wisely. And a lot of numerologists that I've spoken to before say that certain people, say like politicians who are in a bit of position of power, a lot of them will actually go to numerologists and ask them what's going on in the collective consciousness, so that they can then use that in their political messaging and spiel, so that they can, ideally win people over. So that's another example.
Yeah, right. Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah. And I've also heard only just recently that numerology should go to 13. Is that a thing? Or does it?
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, okay. I can't remember where I saw it, but apparently it goes to, or it should go to 13. So
in terms of like the numbers, you mean instead of going from 1 to 9, looking at people's numbers in that way, or at age 13 it should stop? What do you mean?
I didn't really understand it. It was just kind of a quick comment that I think it may have been a psychic or a channeler that said during a channel something about 13, but I could be wrong, so yeah, just ignore that one. Yeah. So so I guess that's what you would offer then for people, is to do their whole blueprint. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's just a way to understand, like, if you've come here and you've chosen certain lessons and themes, if you're not actually sort of conscious of those, you don't recognize what's tripping you up and why you're going through certain behaviors, or why, if you're someone who needs to be doing something creative, if you found yourself stuck in, like, say, a public service, a really dry, technical, boring job, you're going to be deeply miserable, because you've chosen a life where you're going to try and learn, to do something creatively and find your creativity and express that. So it's really designed to, help people in all realms of life. So it could be in terms of their career, trying to match them to what they're really how they're going to grow and how they're going to find fulfillment, trying to, match up what they're doing, what they're looking at doing with their numbers. You can apply it to your relationships. There's certain numbers that sort of really gel and certain numbers that really clash, and you're just speaking different languages. So it doesn't mean that your numbers, don't gel with your partner, so you sort of break up with them, but it means that you might have to try to sort of understand them differently. You have a certain lens of looking at the world, and if you see that theirs is very different, it's not that one's better or worse, but it's just accepting the difference. So, yeah, and a lot of people say with parenting, again, some parents sort of want their children to be like them for various reasons, but they've got a whole different blueprint. So, again, it's trying to understand, why your child does things, accepting that, embracing the difference, rather than sort of instilling the idea that there's something defective or wrong with them because they're not like you and they're different in their way of thinking.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, the two different parents too, the different types or ways of parenting, different things that we do and say as individual parents coming together for that child. So it would also, I guess, be beneficial if someone was to do their numerology, be beneficial to do the whole family, and especially the kids. Is that right?
Like, it depends really what's sort of the pressing issue for someone. Like, if they're really unfulfilled with their sort of vocation or their job, then it might be trying to work out, why is that not working and what would actually work for someone. If parents going through a challenge where they're really at conflict, or they're, say, teenagers going through a lot of angst, then that might be their priority, trying to understand, what's the blueprint of their child, and how can I sort of help them through that period and sort of understand them more. So you can get a general overview in terms of this is sort of how you're typically wired in all sorts of areas of life, or you can sort of look at something a bit more niche and specialized if there's sort of some pressing issue that's coming up for a person.
Yeah, okay. And so people can waver from their blueprint, right? So blueprint means, I guess when you look at it, are you looking at this is what you're meant to do, this is your personality, this is what you're going to be drawn to, and then they can waver away from that. So you would help them to come back on track, like this is where your strengths are.
Yeah, like I guess, free will applies to everything. So, when we decide, what sort of life should we live to give us more balance? Say someone's done many lifetimes of sort of doing the family, parenting, caring for others. They might need to do a lifetime where it's about introspection, finding some sort of greater sense of purpose or meaning or understanding the cosmos. So it's about finding out what's going to give you balance, because if we just do the same sort of thing over and over again, we might really master that area, but there's so much else to life that we neglect. So we sort of have a look at, what we might have not had opportunity to do for a while, what areas we're really stuffed up and we want to get right. So the old idea is that, the Greeks used to talk about this idea where we look at our lives, we decide what we need to potentially have for the next one, then we go into this river of forgetfulness where, all our past life experiences are wiped away, so that we come in fresh to try and sort of start from there. So in terms of wavering from your sort of blueprint, each of the numbers that we work through have like a light and a shadow component. So in one sense, if we looked at, say, the number 5, this is the number that, on a positive sense, embraces change. It says that we need to, look at new ways of doing things. So in a healthy sense, if you've had, say, if we go back 100 years where you were living in America, if you were African American, it was just accepted that you were to be a slave. You were second class. So this sort of someone with a bit of a 5 element, say a person like Abraham Lincoln, they would come in and say, this is just not right, your skin color shouldn't determine whether you're first class or second class. So that's a healthy expression of that number. But on the other unhealthy expression would be, say, if you looked at, one of these sort of rock stars or musicians who've, like, let's say, Amy Winehouse, someone who's, embraced new experiences and taken on a lot of things, but through drugs and alcohol and elements that have ultimately tripped them up. So that overindulgence, being open to new experiences, being exploratory, all these sorts of things can be healthy. But on the negative side, that leads to, addiction and a whole raft of problems. So it's not that, we don't have this free will element. It's just whether we choose to, learn a theme by embracing it and doing it in a healthy way, or we do it in a negative side.
Yeah, okay. And I guess, so I guess you would help them to hone in on, this is where it is, like this is the part of your life you should be looking at. So, yeah.
Well, there's 2 elements. I guess you can look at your sort of blueprint, your natal chart, to look at, what are the sort of patterns of your life, what are the big themes that you've come to learn. And there's also being more in the present. So numerology, just like astrology, has not just a general life overview, but it's got a specific things. At different times in your life, different events will happen, different people will be drawn in. So you can also look at, what's presently pressing for you and what's likely to, say, happen over the next 6 or 12 months as, the cycles and the numbers change for you.
Yeah, okay. So what do you look at when you do someone's reading?
So it's basically the date of birth and it's their name. So each letter in someone's name carries sort of a number or a vibration to it out of 1 to 9. And both of these elements sort of help determine the sort of themes, the lessons, the sort of chart of a person. Astrology is based on your date of birth and also the place of birth, because it's different wherever you are, the position of the planets and everything. So numerology is a little bit easier or cleaner in the sense that we don't look at the time of birth. That's not relevant, or the place of birth. So a lot of people, unfortunately, when they look at their astrology chart, they're not really too exact about their time of birth. And just a few minutes has quite a dramatic change. So numerology is quite nice in the sense that all you need is the name that you were born with and then the date of birth. So that's what we look at.
Yeah, wow. That's so fascinating. I was going to ask you whether letters are part of that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in terms of astrology, like obviously where planets are and everything, and that affects how people feel in general. So sometimes you'll get everyone saying, oh, I just feel like crap today, or I'm just tired today. That's astrology, right?
Well, it's both. It's both the numerology and the astrology. So if you were to look at, say, the COVID situation of late,
Yeah.
if you were looking from an astrology perspective, there was this alignment of the planets where Saturn and one of the other planets, it was either Pluto or Uranus, these are sort of quite heavy, hard-hitting planets. They came together, and Saturn, for example, is a planet of restriction. It shuts everything down. It's quite hard and difficult. So in terms of understanding the COVID situation, you had these two planets coming together, and so suddenly we're not allowed to travel globally. We're stuck in our houses, we're locked down, all this sort of business. So there's an element that you could look at it from the astrological perspective and understand why it's occurred. Then if we look at the numerology aspect, so every year has a particular number to it. So this year we're in the year 2020, and if we add 2 and 2, we get 4. And so 4 is the flavour of this year. And 4 is a number of responsibility, of just, again, being sort of shackled down somewhat. Where last year, the 3 you were in is more like a child. It's free and travel and sociable, and it's having fun and a good time. Where the 4 is the polarity. It's like restriction, and okay, it's time to, be responsible and work hard and all this sort of stuff. So that's how we can understand it from those two dynamics.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that would make next year a 5, which you said.
So that's to do with change and being adaptable and everything. So a lot of people who have been used to, having a business or a career or, or just whatever they've been doing in their life, now with the COVID stuff where you can't travel so much, where a lot of people have economic upheaval and it's, going to continue for a while. So next year is really about sort of changing and adapting. And a lot of people are saying, some people are like, I'm glad COVID's over, let's just go back to business. Where there'd be another school of thought where people are saying, let's look at all the really excellent things that have happened because of COVID. You've had people seeing the stars and have, no pollution in the sky, these things that people haven't seen for years and perhaps ever. So, there's an idea, there's an opportunity from this sort of COVID situation that we can look at doing things differently. It's not just about plundering the earth, making some money, leaving a lot of debt, and it's up to our kids to clean up the mess. So next year, there's an opportunity to, not just, we have to change to a new environment, but there's an opportunity to, change for the better and, put in place some of these good things that have happened to us.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's encouraging. So that's good. Yeah, and when you presented at our meetup, so we meet up with practitioners in the Blue Mountains, you did a talk. And what I found really fascinating, which I'd like you to talk about, is the difference between the 1900s or having the whole millennia with the 1 there, and how now the 2 is going to, like what that means.
Okay. So within our numerology, we've got the individual and we've got the collective. So individually, we all have different charts. We're all quite unique, and that's all good and well. But then there's a collective influence that we all feel the weight of. So from, say, the year 1000 to 1999, every person that was born and every year that we sort of lived under in one capacity had this one energy to it. So the 1 is the number of like the individual, learning who you are outside of the pack and the social aspect. So if you look at things like capitalism and say, people went over to America and they founded all these new lands and things. So we've really gone from living sort of in a tribal capacity to being more individualist. So America's really famous for the rugged individualist. You know, it doesn't matter where you come from, what your background is, your education, your class system. You can sort of create some business or work really hard, like say Henry Ford, and you can, you know, become wealthy and do your own thing. You've got free reign. So in one sense, there was something really healthy about moving from this tribal unit. Because let's say you were living in some sort of tribe and homosexuality was frowned upon. You basically couldn't be yourself because of the tribal rules that were thrown on you. Now, in this day and age, you know, like people will actually, they can, you know, express that. So if you're homosexual and you want to be around like-minded people, you might go to somewhere like a hub like San Francisco and you'll be around people who accept you and share your ideas, and that's all good and well. So there's good and bad to both things. So 1 is the first number in numerology, and it's about being incarnate, and it's about being in the material and about being the here and now. Whereas we move all the way to the 9, it's more about the cosmos and the bigger picture and the longer term. So in the 1 element, it's allowed us to do really well materially. You know, from capitalism, it mightn't be a brilliant system, but it's allowed people to claw out of this idea where you just had to gruel and slug away. You'd have this short, brutish life. You know, people can now live long lives, have, you know, the freedom to, you know, travel, engage in all sorts of hobbies and interests. So there's been a really valuable element in people sort of knowing what they want and going for it, which is sort of the 1 sort of ethos. But on the downside to that, there hasn't been too much concern for people who are, you know, more vulnerable or disadvantaged or missing out. Well, there hasn't been a lot of thought about the consequences of, if we just take everything from the earth and take all the fish out of the sea, then what's going to happen for the next generation? They're not going to have fish. Their whole livelihood and system might collapse. So now that we've come into this sort of period of change that happened around 2000, we've been asked that every year now has a 2 in it. And we've been asked to go to the other side of the spectrum, which is not just about what we want and us as individuals and our group and our nation and our religion and blah, blah. It's now about what's best for everyone collectively, what's fair, what's going to give everyone dignity, rather than I just get what I want and to hell with the future for everyone. So that's a really necessary thing as we all come to finally accepting climate change and just the state of the environmental calamities that are coming down on us. We've really needed to move into this more cooperative, just sort of equitable sort of mindset where we do start thinking about the bigger picture and the consequences that people are starting to feel already. So that's a really beautiful element of going into this two aspect. People are more concerned for others, and there's a lot more sensitivity in the sort of collective. So the downside of this is that every number has its sort of challenging element, and so the 2, while it likes to cooperate, it's also very thrown around by the different moods and different influences of people. So if you say something a little bit confrontational to a person who, say, is a life path 1, it's just water off a duck's back. They don't sort of bother too much about it. But someone who's more of a sensitive, gentle disposition, like a 2, they'll be really affected by it. So if we look at a lot of these kids who have come through and been born since the year 2000, there's this real hypersensitivity. There's social anxiety. There's general anxiety. There's a lot more depression. There's a lot of heaviness. So they really feel things deeply. And where the 1 just gets on with things and toughens up, the 2 just becomes overwhelmed and sinks into it. So there's all sorts of examples that we could look at. But if we looked at, say, Greta Thunberg, so I've got her date of birth here. Okay. So she was born on the 3rd of the 1st, 2003. So she's born in the period of the new millennium. So she's got this 2 element. And she's also a little bit different in the sense that her numbers add up to the number 9. So before the year 2000, no birth date could come anywhere under 10, because if you were born in, 19, whatever it might be, for the last, couple of hundred years or whatever, you're going to have a 1 and a 9. And so your birth number might be 24, 38. It's going to be a larger number. So for people like this, like say Greta, who's born in this new millennium where they are more sensitive and whatnot, they've also got the potential for a lot more concentration in their life path. So before, say the year 2000, if you're a 9 life path, your numbers might have been 27, 9, or it might have been 18, 9. So there was a bit of a balance of different emotions and energies. Where with Greta, she's got a pure 9 number. There's no other numbers making up her date of birth. It all reduces to 9. So the 9 is the person who is either a humanitarian or they're intolerant and like, a fanatic and a bigot. So in Greta's case, she was very much on the humanitarian side of things, where she felt this enormous weight and responsibility that what we're doing to the environment and the world is not sustainable. It's going to cause huge pain. So when she felt this experience, she ended up sort of just shutting down. For a number of years. She didn't even speak. She was just so horrified that the state of affairs was so bad and that adults and humans in the world weren't doing anything about it. She just couldn't cope with things. So that's a bit of an example of how, people born in this new millennium, can really be struggling with things.
Yeah. Wow. That's really fascinating. Yeah.
Mm.
And so other children now getting born in the 2000 millennium, I mean, I guess the planet and the consciousness is going to be moving towards where it will be more comfortable for them?
It's not maybe longer term, but initially, people born in the 2000 periods, they're being born into a world that's really still in the heart of the one aspect. So if we look at our leaders like, say, Donald Trump, or, people who are older and they've all been born in, say, the 1900s, they've got this strong toughness. There's something sort of really grounded and sturdy about these people. And so the younger people who, don't understand why we just don't have more equality. Why is it 1% of people have so much wealth and other people have nothing? Like they don't understand why we can't just change that. But so many people are already invested in this sort of model of doing things. We're taught that we work hard, we put our money away in super, we'll have a retirement, we can enjoy our life. So if you were to embrace the idea of, say, the younger generation, let's just forget about all that. Let's, divest all our shares and our homes and all those things, and let's all just collectively share and look after one another. For someone who's maybe worked, 50 years in a job they've hated because they know they're going to retire and then that's their time, they're probably not going to come on board with that and just sell all their house and give it to other people. So it's an uncomfortable period for the two because they're feeling there's so much going on with the environment and the injustice and, mental health and all this sort of element. And they're living in this world that's really the old sort of paradigm. And, they're finding it hard to change and, bring about this greater awareness. So it's not an easier time that we're in for them. But ideally, as we move further away from the one aspect and we have more people born in this two element and more with a bit of a sense of awareness and cooperation, the more we will come into this place of acceptance. And I think about when I went to school, there was a real a racism, in the school that I was sort of born in. The white kids were the white kids, and other people, there was names for kids who were different in one sort of sense or another. And now when I look at, say, when my kids were going to school and they were born in that period, there was just a complete acceptance. It didn't matter about someone's sexual preference, their skin color, anything like that. The person was the person and they just accepted them. So in some ways, we're really coming into a nice period. There is more tolerance and acceptance and diversity. So it's a bit of a mixed bag in that sense.
Yeah, okay. And I guess the older generation, that's why we're seeing them struggle so much with young kids, I guess.
Yeah, look, I know a guy who's he owns a hairdressing salon, and he's done this for a long time. And he'd get his workers, they'd work hard, they were dependable, they were ambitious, and they were just like him. And now he's getting these younger people who are leaving school and they've got this two aspect to them. And they're not interested in climbing the ladder or making money. They want to sort of connect with the clients, connect with each other. They're not wanting to work day and night. They want to work to pay the bills, but they want to spend time with each other and pursue their interests. So you've got people like that who scratch their head and it's like, what's wrong with this generation? Where, this other generation saying, what's wrong with this old generation? They just want to work and get what they can and who not care about other people, So it's a bit of a loggerheads that we're sort of going through.
Yeah. Oh, that's really funny, and that actually explains everything a lot. So that's really good. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So So if you were to do someone's reading, let's say you did someone, how long would you spend with them? Or like how long does it take to do someone's individual reading?
Well, I tend to sort of book out an hour, but I typically probably go for 90 minutes or 2 hours.
Wow, that much information.
Yeah, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So I'd after I got someone's details, I'd sort of spend some time preparing their charts, trying to look for the patterns and the themes. And then, yeah, as we're sort of going through it, we sort of nut things out, and people fill in the gaps that I can't see just from looking at a bit of paper. But yeah, there's a lot to it. There's a lot of elements to things. Whether it's like what's going on for you now, what's your sort of greater, longer, overarching theme of your life. So by the time you're discussing these things and picking them out, yeah, the time sort of whizzes by.
Yeah, wow. That's a lot of info. That's really cool. Be fascinating. And what about ages? Do you take that into account? Like, are there certain ages where people can expect something?
Yeah, so age comes into it in many ways. So we have a particular sort of theme from our youth, our adulthood, and our elderhood. So we have these three themes that, every say 30 years they sort of shift over. Then we have something which is called a pinnacle or a peak. And it's like we've asked to try and master one of the numbers in some capacity. So my life path is a 3. So what we do there, we use the number 36 for cycles of 9, and we take away the life path, so in my case a 3. So that leaves me with 33. If your life path was a 5, that would leave you with a 31. So at this age, we start finishing the first long 30-year sort of peak that we've been working on, and then we start our second one, and they go for 9 years. And we have 2 of them, and then we have one last pinnacle, which lasts for the remainder of our life. So the first one and the last one carry a lot of weight because we spend a lot more time with them. And then we have these 9-year cycles are occurring, there might be like a theme that we're doing. So for example, my first sort of peak or pinnacle to try and master was the number 1. So that's about separating from the herd and trying to find who I am, without being too enmeshed in family, friends, peer groups, all these things. So when I was younger, I was, quite the loner because I was out there exploring philosophies and ideas and not just buying into what I was, conditioned to believe and think, but trying to find my own way. So that was sort of my area to master. But within these 9-year cycles, so yours was probably a different theme for your first 30 years. As we're going through these 9-year periods, we get a flavour of each of the years. So just as I was saying collectively, last year we were in a 3 sort of aspect, now we're in a 4. Everyone, depending on when they were born, will have their own sort of cycle. So you might be, if you're in a 1 cycle, you're in a period where everything's new and starting. You're going in a change of direction. You might have a new career or a business, or something's new and different and rising up within you. And then if you were, say, someone else might be in a 9 cycle, which is the cycle of completions and endings, that might be a time where they're sort of wrapping things up. Like a relationship might be coming to some sort of closure. An old career might be coming to the end of its tether. So knowing all these different elements, you get a bit of a sense of what's going on for you now, what the next year is going to hold, and then what's going to change, what's sort of coming up. So yeah, there is an element of age has a big bearing on what's going on for you in terms of your numerology.
Yeah, wow. And I also, I had a client once and she was a numerologist as well. And she said that, I'm sure it was 42, at 42, that everyone's life, some aspect of their life is going to do a complete flip. Is that right?
Well, there is the only number that sort of has a bit of a change that appears sort of a bit more suddenly is called one's maturity number. So in your numerology, you have your date of birth number, your life path, and you have a name number, which is called your destiny or expression. So these are both the real heavy hitters, your name and your date of birth. This is the most important influence. When we add them together, we get a maturity number. And that's basically saying that up until you say 35, 40, you've got a bit of maturity, you've dealt with a lot of things, you've got some self-awareness. Only then are you able to embrace this bigger picture to your life. So numerologists might, I haven't heard the age 42 specifically, because someone at 35 who's done a lot of personal development, they might be feeling that maturity number, they might be ready to carry it. Someone who's done bugger all might have to wait for some of their astrological midlife crisis influences to come through, and then they're forced to deal with it. And that might be for someone 45, 50. So there's something around, let's say around the age 40, where, this number that was a little bit hidden, waiting for you to grow up, waiting for you to be ready for it, suddenly emerges and pushes you in a new direction.
Ah, okay, that's what it is. Okay, interesting. Now, when you say astrology, I just want to say I had a client once, so I do past life hypnosis for anyone that doesn't know me. And I hypnotized a client, and he went back to basically when the earth and this whole existence was being created. So he had kind of a view of everything. And he was saying that every planet has life on it. And the reason being is because a planet cannot exist with life on it, because a planet has a core, and it's the souls on it and the life on it that allows the coalescing of all the elements that make that planet a planet, basically. And he said that the planets, how you say that different planets influence different energies, that the life form on that planet is what makes that energy. It's not the planet itself, it's the life forms. And he said that we all actually take turns to be on each planet, because it's not fair to just have someone on the same planet all the time creating this energy. So there's a real balance in that sense, where everyone has a turn at being on the Saturn and on the Jupiter energy, and how that all affects us. So I thought that was really fascinating to get that kind of insight as to how astrology works.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was really cool. So I asked you to do President Trump's numerology.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to see what you get, because I actually, when you said about what to expect for 2020 last year, I thought, oh yeah, cool, it sounds like it's going to be really awesome. And then here we are, and I'm looking back now thinking the 2 is, for me, that when I observe it, is divisive. It's like you're there or you're there. So I'm kind of seeing that people are coming together because of the peaceful protests and all that stuff. But at the same time, it's so divisive. It's people are either there or there. People either love Trump, they hate Trump. They're pro-climate change, not for climate change. It's like every subject currently is just so divisive. So if I hadn't listened to you, I would have thought that the 2s, it's just too divisive, So, yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to what you're going to bring up about that.
Okay. So if we were to say, like, the life path is really the most important aspect to your numbers, to work out Trump's life path, okay, he was born on the 14th of June, 1946. So if we add all those numbers together, we get the number 31, and that reduces to a 4. So if we're trying to understand him, we want to understand the 3 and the 1 and the 4. Okay, the 4 is the strongest, but it's also made up of the 3 and the 1. So if we were to symbolize the number 4, we would get, say, 4 dots, and we'd draw a square. So it's a foundation. It's also a number that's about doing things in the same old way, the status quo, keeping things as they are. So it's quite a conservative number, and it's quite dogmatic, and it believes, this is the way that we need to do things. It's like an adult. When you're a child, which is, say, the number 3, you're quite inquisitive and original, and you think really strange and differently. When you look at adults, a lot of people get quite rigid, quite fixed. This is the sort of number 4. Now, if we were to look at, say, the Dalai Lama, okay, and I've got his date of birth here. So he was born on the 9th of the 7th, 1935. So he has the very same number as Trump. He's at 31-4. So in one sense, the 4 is someone who is really hardworking, and they're really wanting to have society sort of function in a healthy, strong, dutiful manner. So someone like the Dalai Lama, if we look at the 3 and the 1, those elements, the 1 is look at doing things sort of differently. Position of leadership is a quality of the 1, and the 3 is about communicating that and expressing that with emotion. So if we look at the Dalai Lama, he has that leadership capacity, and he's able to really, reach people on an emotional level through his communication. And so what is his legacy? His legacy is the 4. So 4s are all about leaving something behind. They're working really hard, diligently, step by step to leave something lasting. So the Dalai Lama has done a lot to help people sort of understand, how to be happier, how to live more with awareness, all these kinds of things. And some people think, monks have it easy. They just, have some tea and sit in the cave and sleep, and they don't have to work like the rest of it. But if you look at the Dalai Lama and what he does, he gets up, extremely early every day. He spends hours on his practices and his meditations. Then he goes off and he's, doing his meetings, doing his talks and doing all these things. So he's someone who's a real workhorse. He does an enormous amount, but he's contributing something lasting. And in his sense, that's in a good way. So if we look at Donald Trump, again, he's got this 1 element, this sort of leadership, I'll go my own way in a sense. So, and he's got the 3 element where he's sort of trying to stir people emotionally, and he's using communication to get his message across. So he's got those same qualities, he's just using them differently. So Trump, in his mind, he's doing a great thing for America. So he's come in to see America's in this tremendous debt. America outsources, it's got, shut down all its manufacturing and its businesses, it's outsourced them to China and other places, it's then having to buy them in and import them. And so there's no jobs in America, and we're getting in more debt. So he actually feels that by putting tariffs on China, by getting the factories back going in America, he's actually thinking that he's changing, the way of doing things. So in one sense, there is, a good intention from Trump. Okay, there is that element. But he also exhibits, more of the negative side of the 4, which is more, my way is the sort of right way, this rigid, intolerant thinking. Let's build a wall, all our problems will be solved if we stop the Mexicans coming in, this kind of thing. So it's quite a conservative energy, and it can be used for good or ill in the case of the Dalai Lama versus, say, Trump and what he's sort of done in terms of polarizing and getting people to sort of choose a side and then be at war with one another. So that's one element to Trump, is that his life path is a number 4. And if we were to look at his name, so the letters in your name, so A is equal to 1, B equals 2, C is 3, D equals 4. If we were to go through Donald John Trump, so we've got the D there, that's a 4. So the average person, when you look at their name, D, or the number 4 isn't, overly popular. It's not the most common number. You'd expect that you'd have 1 4 in a person's name. Now, in the case of Trump, he's got 3 4s. So he's got like 3 times of this conservative, working, he's a real worker. He's worked his whole life. He's got this really strong 4 element, again, sort of strengthened by the fact that he's got it really strongly in his name. Okay. Now, if we look at other factors in Trump's sort of makeup, we have the 4, the conservative element, and then we've got this 5 aspect. So his date of birth, what did we say that was? The 14th. So 1 and 4 equals 5. So he's got 5 in his date of birth. If we do assign a letter to each letter in his name, Donald John Trump, we come up with, again, the number 5 being his destiny or his expression or the lesson that he's trying to learn. So he has this really conservative side, but he's got this other side that's a real rebel. 5 is the rebel. So when Trump came up there and he's, trying to get into politics and he was just slagging everyone off and, being really uncouth, a lot of people say this guy's a buffoon. He's never going to get in. He's just so outlandish. And that's part of his 5 rebel makeup. And so he spoke to people who were sick of seeing, the Clintons and all the wealthy class sort of people get in the politics. And they thought, why not this sort of brash, rough sort of business type person, this guy who just runs his own race? Why not give him a chance? Let's, give the common man, in this sense, a sort of way. So 5 is sort of that rebel, and he's sort of used that well in terms of being able to get into power and whatnot. So the negative side of the 5 is that they overindulge. So whether it's, I don't know the sort of facts of it all, but there's been a lot of media attention about Trump hasn't been a faithful sort of person. He's had a lot of indiscretions with women, acted really inappropriately. And again, you could, assign that to a bit of the 5, which likes the senses, it likes freedom, it likes to do what it wants without sort of worrying too much about the consequences. So there's a bit of a, schism between Trump and how he sort of acts. So just a couple of, we could go on forever, but a couple of points I'll just make with Trump. So with our date of birth, we come up with numbers that look at sort of challenges that we're going to have in our life. So the 3rd number that's a challenge number is the one that's with us for our whole life, and it's really strong. So for Trump, his challenge is the number 2. So for him to be sensitive, to be tactful, to be cooperative, thinking of everyone's interest, for him, that's just a foreign language. So if we look at how divisive he is and the way that he's sort of really caused all this splintering, we could say, he's really struggling to master that challenge of being sensitive, accepting, being tolerant, rather than just being very, this is the way, being polarizing. So I said earlier that our maturity number, this one that comes to us at around midlife, is our name and our life path. So for Donald Trump, he's a 4 life path with a 5 name. So his maturity number, this thing that you've got to wait till midlife to be ready for, his maturity number's a 9. So potentially, he's got the opportunity, if he's working it really healthy, to become a humanitarian, to do something really good with a legacy. And again, in his mind, he's trying to do that. He's trying to bring jobs back to America, change the debt system, get rid of this old class system within politics. So in a sense, he's trying in his own mind to do that. He's just not doing it very well. So the negative side of the 9, it can be a humanitarian, but it can also be the bigot. It can be the intolerant one. It can be the zealot. This is the only way of doing things. So when we look at Trump and he's blaming all the ills on China, Mexico, all this, stirring up a lot of this racist sort of bigotry aspect, we can really see that negative element of the 9 sort of coming through. So that's a bit about Trump. But I just think it's quite interesting that you can have sort of that same number. You can have the Dalai Lama working it in a really healthy fashion, and someone like maybe Trump with that same number. Again, he's working hard and he's achieving stuff, but is it really, of great value and of pure sort of motivation?
Yeah. And do you reckon that you could be, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but do you reckon that you could be, and any numerologist, be influenced by what you have seen playing out with him in particular now that you're doing his numbers? So you've been kind of watching how everything has been going. You have to form an opinion because that's what we do as humans. Do you think that that's influencing the way that you interpret what you see and comparing it, Dalai Lama to Donald Trump? Do you think that you're influenced in that way? And can that happen?
I'm not sure what you mean, but are you meaning like interpreting the numbers to sort of fit your story, or what
Yeah,
do you mean?
so I guess, I mean, we all, know Dalai Lama, the wonderful human, and then the way that Trump has been pictured in the media and everything, and that, here's a, buffoon, and he's, women, and he's racist, and that's what we're seeing in the narrative in the media. So I'm just wondering whether that can influence the way that you would then read and come to a conclusion with his numbers.
I think, you've got to be a bit discerning, trying to work out, what is factual and what is, maybe gossip and slander and things. I mean, when you have dozens and dozens and dozens of women saying Trump was inappropriate, they
Mm.
could all just be lying and trying to get some money. Or it could be the fact that, Trump and his character and, the general feel that you get from him, it's probably more in keeping with the fact that he has been sort of, inappropriate. So I think, I don't know, you've got to sort of just discriminate. But, perhaps the great thing about, say, numerology is that, it's not totally right to say, the Dalai Lama's worked his 31-4 number in a really healthy way and Trump's done it really poorly. There's sort of bigger pictures that we're, probably not very privy to. So instead of, like, a lot of people demonize Trump and say he's the worst person ever, I'm leaving the country, all this sort of stuff, if we can look at some of the healthy elements, like the old way of doing things where capitalism was everything and the 1% had all the money and this sort of stuff, in order to really, just see how destructive that sort of is, we almost have needed a Trump sort of figure who will come in and it's, really business minded and really, let's just push the old capitalism a bit harder. We almost need someone that extreme and, not getting to the heart of the issue with inequality, or, showing that, he's very bigoted and he's trying to win people over through, old things like hatred and not healthy aspects. So Trump, a lot of people could say, he's, not a good person, where we could say, maybe he's playing a really important role. Like, just as, Hitler was, abhorrent what he did, in terms of that racist stuff, we'd like to think that we'll never have a period again where you have this Holocaust system where a whole race is nearly wiped out. So I think numerology, there's an element of, there's bigger pictures at play and people play a role. And it's not that Trump is, say, a newborn, he's only had a couple of past lives and he's really, doing things poorly. It could be, he's agreed to play this sort of tyrant, this sort of bully, this sort of role, so that people will sort of look at things with greater perspective and, he might usher in change rather than keep things the old way. So,
Yeah. And that's something that I've kind of come across with clients as well under hypnosis. And I know myself that it's a time of, I call it the great squeeze, where it's the outlook is so dire for lots of people, no matter which side you're on, that it's kind of squeezing people to look within. And so I do believe he should be where he is because he's doing that role for everyone. And being the leader, there's people now saying that he has to be the character that he is to be in that role. And like you say, we're going into the 2000s now, so we're kind of dismantling what the 1000's had put into place. So so I guess looking at that leadership role and all his numbers that you were talking about, I guess he's kind of the right numbers to get that job done, I guess.
Well, it's just interesting that Barack Obama, he was a life path too. So he was much more about bringing in equality and fairness. So if we look at, his intentions and what he wanted to bring about, he was actually very, justice minded, very sensitive. He was all about bringing, getting rid of, the racism, the class system, all this sort of business. But he was really stymied by the fact that politicians ultimately don't sort of run the presidency. They're a little bit of a puppet. It's all the other people behind the scenes that have the power. So he might have had all the intentions in the world and wanted to bring about like healthcare change and all these sorts of things. But when the bigger picture controlling things doesn't want that, it doesn't happen. So it's interesting that, he got ushered in, we're going to see this great change, where ultimately a president could only do so much and there was no great change in the end. So they've gone from one extreme, maybe, say, African Americans who've always been downtrodden, maybe they had an idea, if we have an African American president, we will get a bit more fairness and equality and things. That didn't happen. So now you've got people jump the opposite thing. Well, maybe it was a class system. Maybe it's like the Clintons and these old school people are the problem. Let's just get someone who's really rough and tumble and not in that system to come in. Now they've had Trump come in and nothing's really changed again for the average people. We're seeing the riots now, whether it's race issues or, wealth inequality, nothing's really changed. So if we've tried the sensitive approach that has no sort of nothing behind it with Barack Obama. And then we've tried this sort of really dogmatic, we just need to kick everyone out and get back to, being, Americans and doing our own thing. That hasn't worked either. Then maybe there's a thing, it's actually the whole system. It's the politics and the capitalism, it's the whole thing that needs to be changed, because we've tried these two different extremes, nothing's actually changing. And so people will come to the recognition, let's forget about putting all our responsibility on politicians and let's actually enact a change ourselves. So maybe that will be what sort of unfolds.
Yeah, perhaps. It'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah.
It unfold. Yeah. Another thing I wanted to ask you is there numerology, or is there something to locations on the planet?
No. So the cities have a number, I think Sydney, for example, if I've got it right, might be a number 1, which is sort of about being more independent as opposed to cooperative. So if I've got that right, if you think of Sydney, it's the economic heart of the country, it's where the money's made and people sort of really do their business things. So there is an element of the sort of city, cities that you live in have its own sort of number, but it's probably not given as much weight as, say, astrology, that sort of works out, there's certain places for you to live where the planets align within your chart and you're going to be much more successful or comfortable in a certain aspect of life than if you're in a place that's really, causing conflict with that. So, yeah. So I'd say, it's not as strong as in astrology, but, towns and cities do have this sort of number, flavour to them as well.
Yeah, okay. And what about the big places like Uluru and Stonehenge and them? Is there anything with that?
I haven't looked at the numbers to any of that. The only thing that I have sort of looked at is that, just the idea that there's these ley lines, there's these energy sort of centers, through the earth, and they line up with these places. So, if we were to look at, say, astrology, which is based on the idea of electromagnetic energy, when that moon's full, the tides are sort of fuller, people's emotions are heightened, there's something really potent about the movements of the planets. So, if there are these energy centers within, the earth, then, to me, that would probably more explain it rather than, whatever the number is for Uluru or, say, Stonehenge. I would say that's probably my feeling.
Yeah, okay. So I didn't know whether, because we've got the numbers now for locations, like with the GPS and stuff, you can type in numbers to where you want to go. I didn't know if that was something.
Yeah, no, I haven't sort of got into that. No, I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. Yeah. Now, do you reckon that death numbers are anything? The death date of a person?
The only thing I might have heard is the fact that it explains, the personal year or the, particular cycle that someone's in. But generally, a lot of people don't talk about it. It's not really.
Yeah. It's probably not that important, right?
No, I think I was looking at Michael Hutchins's numbers, because he had his suicide or whatever his thing might have been. Yeah. And I just recall looking at his numbers when he was in his 30s or whatever. And just from memory, there was a lot of change and upheaval and difficult sort of things going on for him with his numbers, which, in the end might have, resulted in him taking his own life. So it's not the fact that the date he died was significant. It was more what was going on for his numbers at the time, I would say.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I didn't think it was, because once a life is done, I guess it's done. But yeah, it just kind of crossed my mind whether that was anything.
Sure.
Yeah. The other thing I want to ask you before we finish up is recurring numbers. Is that anything that you look into, or is that something significant that you know anything about?
I have sort of read and had a little look-see at it. So a lot of people would commonly say the number 1111, something to do with waking up, spiritual awareness. So in numerology, the number 11 is called a master number, reduces to 11-2, and it's to do with being a spiritual messenger or, just waking up in a sort of spiritual capacity. So, yeah, I guess I've seen that myself. I do notice the 1111, and it has been happening for some time. And that's the number I probably most hear about in terms of recurring. But people might also find they've got their own individual numbers. So I don't know what it is, but the number 747 is a number that I seem to see quite a lot, whether it's, on my car radio, on my phone, whatever it is. And I don't know whether that's more 747 is in the airplane taking off and it's time for me to initiate things, or there's some other number to it. Yeah, I'm not sure, but that's just a personal thing that just is a quirk that comes up for me. So people might have, their collective numbers as well as their own little quirky ones.
Yeah, because I often get clients saying, oh, I was seeing 333, now I'm seeing 222, and now I'm seeing ones. And there's, different people that say, like you, like 3 different numbers, like a sequence, and they see it all the time. So, I guess it's their own little message for them.
Yeah, I guess it's probably just part of the idea of synchronicity, like when you're open and growing, the universe sends you little postcards and signs that you're on the right track. So for a lot of people, it is seeing those recurring numbers.
Yeah. And I had a client say, or that the belief was that 1111, the 2 ones are a mirror. So 11 is looking at itself. So it's reflection. So the message with that was for anyone that does see 1111, and I actually feel like it's probably the best explanation I have heard, is that 11 is looking at itself. So you need to look at yourself in that moment, and you need to think about, what are you feeling? What are you desiring? What are you thinking in that moment when you see it? So when I heard that, I started doing it, because I was also seeing 1111 everywhere all the time. Every time I look at my phone, it's 1111. So I started to be aware of it, and I started to look at myself, like what's going on in my mind and in my heart in that moment. And I guess making changes or shifting in my thinking, like, sort of thinking, oh, maybe that's not right, or maybe I should do something different. And I stopped seeing 1111. Okay. And I started seeing 1112, 1113. So, I guess for me, that was kind of confirmation. Like, we didn't need to tap you on the shoulder at 1111, because you've kind of addressed and looked at what we were telling you to look at within yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, I really like the idea that the universe has a bit of a sense of humor and it's a bit playful. So the idea that we get our personal messages, I like it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was really cool, that explanation.
Yeah.
But and then another one had the 3s and the 2s and the 1s, and I can't remember what 3s was, but each step was closer to then the pearly gates of heaven. So the one were the pearly gates. So I guess it's just noticing when you see something recurring and just taking a moment that, someone's trying to tell you something.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But we have messages all around us, so I guess in lyrics and everywhere. So,
yeah.
So is there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
No, I think we sort of covered a bit of ground there. No.
I'm just really glad that you talked about the difference between the 1 and the 2 dominating our years, because I thought that was really fascinating. And Greta Thunberg was really fascinating, because you said that hasn't been seen since Christ, that numerology. Is that right?
Yeah, like, because every year sort of, I guess, unless you were born, if you think of the year 1000, if you're born the first of the first 1000, then you've got, just 3. But once you hit, other years like the 1 and the 8, so from the 1800s onwards, if you were born, or the 1700s, unless you were the first of the first, like even then, let's say the first of the first 1700, you're now up to 10. So there's no 9. So at least over the last 300 years, and before that, it would just be 1 in, a million that would have that number. So at least for the last 300 years, there's been no purely concentrated number that you might have, like, say, with Greta and her 9. And so, some of these kids can, if they can work that aspect like Greta has, they can achieve enormous difference in the world. but others, you know, might just be overwhelmed by it and really feel things a lot sort of stronger. So yeah, the only thing I'd sort of say about the sort of 1 and the 2 shift that we've had over this last 20 years is that we sort of need both. So the kids with the 2 that are really overwhelmed easily, really emotionally just get exhausted and numbed and can't cope with things, they need these sort of stronger, healthy role models that have this 1, that have this strength, that don't get flustered, that have this resilience. So we need, you know, good role models and adults and elders and things to sort of guide the 2 as they're trying to help bring about this change and bring in that compassion and sensitivity and fairness and justice. And as ones, as the older generation who are seeing these younger people, rather than writing them off as just being too wishy-washy and wimpy and all this sort of stuff, it's actually seeing the beauty in this tolerance and this diversity and this real passion to bring about, you know, the sustainability of, you know, our life and all these good things. So that's really probably the thing about numerology as you understand it, is there's no good or bad numbers, there's no right or wrong. There's more, you know, shadow and light aspects, and it's understanding and accepting the diversity and trying to work these elements in the best capacity.
Yeah, cool. And I guess what I was going to, or what I was saying when you were talking about Trump's numerology, is there a difference between numerologists, and I guess that's what I was asking, can they interpret it differently, or is it set? Like, are the numbers set? And that's why I kind of said, do you think that there was some influence with, because you know him through the media, or if you do numbers for someone you know as opposed to someone you don't know? And would another numerologist perhaps give a different reading?
Yeah, so if we looked at the name Donald John Trump, so the letter Y can either be counted as a consonant or a vowel, which has a different sort of number associated with it. So some people would look at someone's name if there was a Y in it and interpret it one way, and other people would interpret it differently. But in the case of, say, that Donald John Trump, there's no Y. So numerologists would accept that, you know, his name number is the same no matter how they calculate it. Whereas with, say, the date of birth, there's probably 2 popular schools of thought. So if we were to look at the Dalai Lama, if we were to add up all his numbers, we're going to come to 31 and reducing to a 4. Now, the other school of thought, which is probably a little bit less popular, is the idea, instead of just adding up each number, you add up the date of birth, the month of birth, and the year of birth, reduce that to a single number, and then you get something different. So in the case of the Dalai Lama, if you reduced his number, what would we get here? So 1935, for example, that's 18, which becomes 9. So then we've got 9 and 9, 18, and 7, 25. Is that right? 10, 18, 9, 18, 25. So they might have, you know, that different number they would come up with. Yeah, I'm not sure if I've sort of muddled that up, but basically it's really about whether you add each number individually or whether you group them into their date, month, and year sort of rankings. Okay. So that has a different model. So I think, by using this other model with the Dalai Lama, you get 22-4, which is a different flavour than the 31-4. You know?
Okay.
So yeah, so that's really sort of the point of difference. But you're still getting that number 4 in the end. It's just how it's flavoured, whether it's the 3 and the 1 or a double 2 focus. That would be, you know, a matter of interpretation.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, cool. You sound very knowledgeable. Have you always liked numbers?
I did well at maths at school, so that was sort of, I had a bit of an interest in that, and it was really more, I had a friend who was an astrologer, and she was very complex and deep in her knowledge, and so I thought, if I'm going to study one or the other, maybe because I'm sort of good with numbers and maths, maybe numerology will be easy, because my friend made astrology seem quite complex. And I guess, you know, as I've spent years exploring it, I realised that yeah, just like chemistry and physics, one's not deeper than the other. Same with astrology and numerology. They're both quite complex if you keep going deeper with them. But yeah, it was just more, I was sort of better at maths and I figured that might help. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Nice. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. That was really good.
Yeah, great. Thanks for all your questions and good to talk to you.
Yeah, good to talk to you. I'm hoping to get some other people on board and just bring practitioners and discuss what they do, find out how it works, and just bring it to the people, because often you kind of hear about a therapy or you hear about, you know, some method of doing something. You're like, what actually is that? Like, you kind of have an idea, but you don't really know deeply how it works and whether it's something you want to do.
Yeah, I think whether it's, you know, people watching a video or just listening to you sort of speak, for people who are traveling or whatever, it can be, you know, just more practical or interesting than having to go and say read a website or, you know, read an article or a book or whatever. It's just the medium that we're getting more into, the sort of visual format. So it's great what you're doing, and exposing people to all sorts of things.
Yeah. Yep, because I hate reading. I'm sick of reading. I just want to watch stuff and listen to stuff.
Yeah.
Plus, I think a video gives energy too. I think that, you know, you kind of convey a bit of energy rather than just words.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Yeah. All right. So I will put all your links and everything in the comments, so people can contact you if they want to. And so thanks for today, and might chat again in the future.
Great. All right. Thanks so much for your
Oh,
time.
actually, one more question. On your website or on your Facebook page, do you do stuff for people to follow? Like, do you do numerology ongoing for, say, global stuff?
Yeah, so I guess I do blog articles. So it depends what my interest is at the time, whether I'm working on sort of career development or working on, you know, the astrology or numerology. But certainly, either the blog section of my website or otherwise on the particular Facebook page, depending on someone's interest. Because I've got one for, say, the careers stuff, one for the numerology and astrology. Yeah, you can certainly sort of follow those things, and new articles that come through, you'll be sort of made aware of those. So, sure.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Great. I'll have a look at it and I'll follow. See how things unravel for our planet.
Yep. Excellent.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, thanks very much, Marcus, and I'll catch you later.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.